The year was 1802, and for the first time in quite a while, the bitter tensions between France and England had plateaued, and the governments of Europe as a whole were in the midst of a violent peacetime. Although its own government at the time could barely be called a government, France still managed to seize an opportunity in the peacetime that allowed the French to conduct a scientific expedition to one of England's fresh new colonies, that colony being called New Holland, later known as Australia. Among the visitors to this fascinating new world was the French naturalist Francois Péron, who after inspecting it wrote the first official scientific accounts for the expedition. He also, however, happened to write a substantial proposal as to why the French should send another expedition down to New Holland, this time a military expedition, with the sole intent of invading Sydney. In 1803, not even a year after the initial French scientific expedition in 1802, were Britain and France at war again. The French, now invigorated by the strategic genius of Napoleon Bonaparte, were becoming very ambitious, and Francois Péron, along with the rest of the French expeditioners, were on their way home to Europe with some very interesting proposals. On their return to French territory, multiple members of the crew suggested plans for invasion, all written up on their way back, and Francois Péron was by far the most ambitious in this literary endeavor. Utilizing the time he had on their ship on their voyage back to France, Péron created a memorandum that included an introduction and 5 chapters that essentially covered everything from logistics, statistics, and weak points to a plan for its administration and discussions of its ultimate use for France. Péron, a patriotic Frenchman, saw Australia as an important asset for the French. He saw the colony as having important implications for many nearby Spanish territories such as Peru and Chile, which he thought would soon be captured by the British. He also saw the primary colony of New South Wales to be a geopolitical base for further British expansion in the Pacific, and therefore urged his superiors into immediate action. Péron suggested 3 possible routes for an invasion force. One that would penetrate Broken Bay to the north of Sydney, another that would attack Sydney head-on, and a third that planned to attack from Botany Bay in the south. Péron suggested a relatively small military expedition force of 1,800 men. The reason Péron thought that the plan needed so little was because of the Irish convicts he planned to arm on their arrival to New South Wales. For this reason, a large part of the fleet was intended to be dedicated purely to the transport of rifles, which was to be handed out to the embittered Irish prisoners in their fight against the British. Ultimately, Péron's preference for landing became Botany Bay. In his final iteration of the plan, the French force was to sail in unmarked ocean lanes void of British presence and initially land at Van Diemen's Land, or present-day Tasmania. Once they reached the poorly defended island just south of the mainland, the plan was to capture it quickly and gather essential intel that would indicate the latest information of Port Jackson and the signals the British ships used to identify themselves. Upon this conquest, the French would land at Botany Bay in the dead of night and reach the town centre in only 3/4 of an hour. In Péron's vision, the invasion could be accomplished while the town slept and without bloodshed, as he believed the English garrisons in New South Wales were not good soldiers and were spread too far apart from each other for reinforcements anyway. Once the town of Sydney had been taken, Péron figured the rest would fall like dominoes, as all other states were largely dependent on New South Wales. It didn't stop there, however. Péron and his associates had thought ahead to plans of dealing with the newly captured colony as well. They raised 3 possibilities with their superiors that involved either destroying the colony, making it independent, or keeping it for themselves. In the former scenario of destroying the colony and modern-day Australia as we know it, Péron figured that destroying it would be an easy solution to end the threat quickly, as if they chose to keep Australia or make it independent, problems could arise in the decades to come. The first logical step after the occupation, however, was to load all the remaining English troops on vessels and send them to Europe in exchange for French prisoners of war who would thus be sent back to Australia as reinforcements. The French would have then strengthened their alliance with Ireland and the convicts on the mainland by freeing political prisoners and drafting an entire Irish battalion of 600 men into the French army, commanded by their own Irish officers. Péron's ultimate goal for the capture of Australia, however, was to use it as a political chess piece in France's seemingly eternal fight with England. Unlike what the English did in actualized history, in Péron's design, Australia would have not been developed. It would have either been completely obliterated of majority European presence or held for a while to be used as future leverage for the seemingly unstoppable Emperor Napoleon, the man who would bring glory back to France. Péron, as I stated before, was a very proud Frenchman, and he hoped his extensive plan would win him the admiration of the government and Napoleon himself. If this plan were to go through, Australia as we know it wouldn't have existed. As with all tales of alternate history, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what it would have been like had France successfully taken it, but one can assume that if it was not destroyed by the French, the G'day mates of Australia probably wouldn't have existed and would likely be hearing a weird French regional language that would have developed over the years of French rule. While this is a pretty cool thought experiment, the fact of the matter was that Napoleon never seriously considered going to extreme lengths for Australia. Yet. The plans made by Péron were largely put to the side in favor of the wars raging in Europe and Napoleon's grand vision of conquering it all. As many will know, this grand plan ultimately failed, and in overreaching and not consolidating his victories, Napoleon suffered his first major defeat in 1812, where he was outsmarted by the Russian and his army eventually brutally whittled down and forced to retreat. It was pretty much all downhill from there, and Napoleon's grandiose visions of a Europe under his control vanished, now immortalized in a song we know as Viva la Vida. In saying that, if Napoleon had not been so rushed in his approach to the invasion of Russia and had continued the immense cunning he showed throughout the first bit of his conquests, he could have easily taken the weakened nation, and Europe would essentially be under his control. If this were to have happened, it is almost a guarantee Napoleon would have had his eyes on New South Wales. Although, as stated before, Péron's reports were largely cast to the side, Napoleon, an immensely hardworking man, still made time to look them all over and quite liked them. Napoleon had indeed thought about the conquest of New South Wales even before his overly ambitious invasion of Russia. In June of 1810, he had actually issued what turned out to be futile instructions to the Isle of France administration. It is proposed on the arrival of these expeditions to take the English colony of Port Jackson, where considerable resources will be found. Nothing ever came of this, however, and as stated before, Napoleon was simply too focused on his conquests of Europe first over everything else. The same year Napoleon issued that futile order, François Péron died at the age of 35, never to see the outcome of his ambitious plan to take Australia and hold it captive or destroy it. So guys, I know this is a little bit different to what we usually do on this channel, as it's not focused on any of the world wars or any modern wars in general. Being from Australia though, when I stumbled onto this, I found it extremely interesting as I had never heard of any of these plans before, so I thought I had to make a video on it, and if you want to check out the sources I used in this video, please do head to my Discord. Also, be sure to let me know what you think of these types of history videos so I know whether I should do more or not, and let me know what you think modern day Australia would have looked like if the French had taken it from the English. Would the Opera House be made of croissants? Would the Harbour Bridge have a white flag at the top instead of an Australian one? You decide. Jokes, friends, still love you. And lastly, just before you go, if you do want to help support the channel, please do check out my Patreon. Any dollar really does help, guys, so thank you to my current patrons, and thank you for even considering it. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.